Hey, what's up everybody? It's MGTOW Gamer coming back with another video. This is actually in discussion for the upcoming changes for the next patch. I know that ZeniMax is looking to again change some of the combat, the way combat works in update 22. Didn't want to discuss something in regards to Magic Decay. I know they're trying to change the way the other morph of Power Lash works. I'm trying to give DK, I guess, a little more burst, or maybe because they outright refuse to give the class an execute. Like almost every other class has access to an execute except for Mag DK and of course Magden. Magden, on the other hand, has the best dot in the game, and also, in my opinion, two of the best spammables between Shulk and Birds. So it's really hard to compare the damage, especially because they also gain access to Major Breach just with Shulk. So it's really hard to compare the two in terms of damage output. In my opinion, Magden out DPS's Mag DK all day, especially just because Mag DK has nothing that hits as hard as Shulk, and Birds hits almost as hard as Shulk. And so you have literally a 3-second rotation where you can light attack with your staff, you know, Shulk, light attack Bird, and everything almost hits at about the same time. And of course, because of the reduction that they made with the previous patch, where they reduced the cost of the ability, makes their sustain even better. Mag DK struggles with sustain. It has for a long time. The developers don't understand the way the class works, the design of the class, and because they continually get different people who are their combat developers, this is why we see these wild swings in how DK works and their abilities. So with the next patch, they're looking to change Molten Whip into some sort of an execute where the more abilities that you use, it kind of scales up. The major problem with this change is that Mag DK struggles when it comes to healing. Not necessarily in 1v1. I think Mag DK overheals in 1v1 between spamming embers, and of course you have to keep in mind Power Lash, and then of course utilizing Coagulating Blood, and of course most Mag DKs are running either Flames of Oblivion or Cauterize. So in a 1v1 scenario between potions and the 3 different healing abilities, as well as using your ultimate, Mag DK has very little issues in terms of healing. What it does have issues is with damage output. But where it starts to drop off a lot is when the class is surrounded by multiple enemies, which is the nature of the build. The character is designed around a frontline class that is meant to win the war of attrition. And of course this really falls off in scenarios where a DK finds themselves surrounded by, of course, more than one enemy. And it's because, one, the abilities cost way too much. The main spammable is either Whip, Burning Embers, and of course Engulfing. If you want to run a gap closer using 3,500 for a gap closer with very minimal damage is very expensive. It's costly, especially because all other characters pretty much have better mobility than Mag DK. So if you want to stay on top of your opponent outside of the 7-second window where you can use Fossilize, a lot of times either your opponent moves so far away that you can't continue to keep DPSing them down, or you have to utilize Empowering Change, which of course is very It's very costly. And also it's important that it costs you roughly 4,000 magicka just to apply 2 dots. When you're fighting characters that use mist form, or like for example you're fighting a Templar, this gets cleansed and damage reduced, or if you're fighting a Nightblade for example. So between things like mist form, cleanse, and cloak, these 2 abilities do next to no damage, but it costs you 4,000 magicka just to cast them. The other issue is that Power Lash is dodgeable, so you end up most of the time when fighting things like Nightblades, the Power Lash misses. I would say almost all the time. If you're fighting a Nightblade and you CC with Fossilize, of course you have to whip and then get the Power Lash. I would like to see them change the Power Lash so that when a person is CC'd, you automatically get the Power Lash proc instead of having to CC, whip, and then reapply the Power Lash, especially because it has a cost to it now, and a lot of times because it's so slow and clunky and requires this elaborate setup of skill rotation, it misses a lot. You can't compare Power Lash to things like Proct Frag. Proct Frag, the damage is ridiculous. Like, the amount of damage that you get from a Proct Frag, like, you can't compare to Power Lash. Even with this particular build, I run 3,500 spell damage. In no CPBGs, I'm at almost 29k magicka with 2750 in spell pen, and the ability still doesn't hit anywhere near as hard as a frag. And a frag gets procced far more often than a Power Lash, because if the only ability that you have to, in essence, root your opponent or CC them is typically going to be Fossilize. Fossilize can only be applied every 7 seconds because of CC immunity. If your opponent runs a CC immunity pot, if they're running an immobility pot, literally it gives them 21 seconds before you can repower Lash. And that's of course unless you're running Sword and Shield and then you're making use of either Burning Talent or Choking Talent, which is far too expensive just to Power Lash. Think about this. Just for me to get a Power Lash with this combo, I have to spend 4,000 magicka to hit Choking Talons. Then I have to spend 2,400 to whip, and then another 1,200 to get my Power Lash proc. That's 4,000, 6,500, and then another, it's literally almost 8,000 magicka just to get Power Lash proc. It's ridiculous. On a Magicka DK that's running 40k max magicka, you're literally spending 20% of your magicka just to get a Power Lash proc. It's ridiculous. It's no other class. Even look at Magicka Nightblade. To get the equivalent, according to the developer, when you're looking at Spectral Belt, all you have to do is light attack. That shit's free. Either light attack, heavy attack. Either you get 2 heavy attacks and a light attack, or a combination thereof, and you literally get ult-like damage. And of course, that's going to be nerfed, at least in terms of the Minor Berserk from the passive of that skill. But even still, it's like you can't compare an ability that gets proc that's free, has no cost, to the setup, the elaborate setup that MagDK has to go through to output some sort of real damage. Because Embers, like I said before, if you're fighting a Nightblade, 1 cloak reduces Embers damage by 50%, which means the healing that you get from Embers is also reduced. If that Nightblade cloaks twice, you get nothing. It does no damage, you get no healing from it, you just wasted your resources. So if you literally Embers and then hit Engulfing and he recloaked, that whole setup did nothing. Right? That 4,000 magicka that you just spent does no damage. If you're fighting a Templar, he just cleanses that, your whole setup just did no damage. You have to reapply all those dots. You've wasted valuable time, and on top of that, you gain no reward. You don't get a heal at all. The 10% extra damage plus the mediocre dots damage, it just disappears because it got cleansed. If that person is running Mistform and they Mistform for the duration, you do no damage. You also get no heal because the heal is based on the damage. And that's something that they're changing for the upcoming patch, they said, is the way that single target dots apply. It says here, I'm just gonna pull it over right here for you so you can take a look at it. So in this sentence right here, it says single target dots having been a long-standing group of abilities that were not consistent in their application of damage. Looking at these type of ability duration, tick frequencies, and delays, a consistent pattern of application was missing from ability to ability. For example, the reason why Dawnbreaker was always better than, for example, if you were a Stam DK using Leap, was because even though the tooltip of Leap is higher than at least the initial hit, the thing is that the moment you hit somebody with a Dawnbreaker, you automatically got the first tick of damage with Dawnbreaker. So it was that overinflated initial hit plus the immediate 1 second. It happens automatically. It's like a split millisecond where you would take the damage from Dawnbreaker and then immediately take the tick from the dot that's associated with it. Now the problem is that that's going to affect how, so let's switch this over. That's also going to affect Embers, right? Because if they're changing it so that, then you see that same issue with Embers. You spam Embers, you get the initial dot damage, and then you get the initial tick. So if they change that, it means you're going to have to wait that much longer to get the ramp up for Burning Embers to basically get the heal from Burning Embers. So with that change coming into the next patch, that's also going to affect both Stam DK but also Mag DK, because Mag DK relies on it as a very cheap source of healing. In my opinion, the changes that Mag DK needs is a cost reduction. Straight through all of their abilities are far too expensive, especially when you consider their heal. Coagulating blood costs way too much for what it does. Literally, if you compare coagulating blood with, for example, Honor the Dead, right? Honor the Dead costs like 1800 magicka from the base morph because of the 60% reduced cost if you use it below 75%. Now you compare that to coagulating blood, right? So coagulating works, it has a base heal, and then the heal ramps up the lower you get. Realistically speaking, to get a good heal for the cost, you have to sit in execute range. Now, the 33% gets reduced in PvP because of the nerf to 50% reduction to all heals. It is not uncommon to get 10k heals from Honor the Dead when you're at 75% HP. You're not going to get a 10k heal from Coag at 75%. You're lucky if you'll get 4k, because even with like 8k on Coag in no CP is hard to reach. You might sit around like 6.8 for the cost of 4,300 magicka. And then of course you gain another 18% of your missing HP, right? So if you're sitting at something like 20k and you're at 50% HP, you only get 18% of the 10k that you're missing, which is only 1800 on top of the 4k heal. So you're literally spending 4,000 plus magicka to get about a 5k heal. it's not worth casting. That's why most DKs typically don't run it. It's far too expensive, especially if you get defiled. Now you compare that to like something like Gauntlet or Dead. It literally costs 60% less and heals for 1.5 times the amount. Because if you just straight compare the healing from Honor of the Dead, the tooltip, you run the exact same gear, right? The tooltip alone is 1.5 times the amount for 60% less. We're not even talking about the 8% that you'll get from the passive heal. So in my opinion, Coag should have the percent heal removed, and instead it should increase the heal enough to make it comparable to Honor the Dead, and then on top of that, remove the Major Fortitude. Like, most people run pots, right? There's no point in having a redundant buff like Major Fortitude on it. Instead, what they should do is give it a heal over time, so that you get the burst heal, and then it gives you something like 50% of the heal over the next, say, 6 seconds, because you wouldn't want it to be too long, but at the same time you also wouldn't want it to be too short. And I always was in favor of them, instead of buffing Coag, was buffing something like Deep Breath, Inhale. Most DKs don't run it. It's far too expensive for what it does. The heal is lackluster. It's based off the damage. With even a good tooltip, I mean, if you're running 4,000 spell damage, you are lucky if you have 2,200 in CP, maybe 2,500 per opponent, which of course is cut in half, and that's before mitigation. So you're literally looking at a 1.25k heal per person for the cost of 4,000 magic, and then of course a mediocre damage. No one runs Deep Breath. It's not worth running, because so many abilities now are uninterruptible. For example, like Soul Strike. Back in the day, you used to be able to interrupt heavy attacks. You used to be able to interrupt things like Uppercut. You used to be able to interrupt Flurry. I'm not sure if you can still interrupt Snipe or not. But typically, anything that had a cast time to it, you could interrupt with Inhale, with Deep Breath. With so many abilities now no longer interruptible, the only thing in my opinion that you can still interrupt is Jesus Beam. Nobody's Jesus beaming you from up close, and of course players who are using Resurrection. If you're trying to res somebody, you can interrupt them. It's not worth running Deep Breath. In my opinion, this ability should be changed. Instead of a straight interrupt, it should be the initial hit causes a stun. The secondary does an explosion. This way, when you inhale, it actually, because most people just move out of the way. The moment they see you inhale, they just move away to avoid the exhale. So this would allow the exhale to be a little more guaranteed. And of course, as a Mag DK, when you're being pressed by multiple opponents, this allows you to reduce the amount of magicka. Instead of having to fossilize multiple opponents, you can just use Deep Breath, and that will stun multiple opponents, giving you that little bit of relief from the amount of pressure that you're taking. And then of course, in my opinion, Draw Essence should have its heal increased. So the healing up front should be increased, and then the secondary, instead of Draw Essence doing a 10% reduction, you should gain the minor Magicka Steal to all opponents that you hit, because a lot of Magic DK abilities are AoE. So at the very least, as you're fighting multiple opponents, instead of having to apply, for example, being forced into running a Destro Staff and then running Elemental Drain, you can actually use your class ability, right? Because Magicka Templars have access to an AoE minor Magicka Steal, and in my opinion, it would help DK with their stain immensely. With the next patch, they're toying with changing the way reflective scales works. In my opinion, it's kind of hit or miss. The real issue is that Magic Decay lacks damage. Either you go really glassy and you're really easy to kill. Either you're going in light armor. I see it all the time. Light armor DKs and they just get blown up by a stam DK coming out of stealth. It happens all the time because they rely on damage shields. They typically have weak resistance, and then of course, because DKs lack mobility, they end up over spamming Harness Magicka because they don't have anything to reduce the amount of damage that they're taking outside of wings. So they end up over spamming Harness Magicka, and it costs roughly 4,100, and you in no CP you're getting like maybe a 5k shield, which is too expensive, and that's why you see a lot of Magic DKs that run light armor struggle with sustain. And you see, I see most Magic DKs that run light armor, they run Elemental Jane, they run full light armor, and they still struggle with sustain within fighting one opponent. They literally get gassed fighting one person, unless they come in with an alt, CC that person, double whip, and it all comes off without the person dodging or blocking. Most of the time, they're going to get gassed very quickly. So in my opinion, some of the changes that need to take place would be a change to Obsidian Shard. For the amount of the healing that it does is really good, but because it can be dodged, it costs too much for what it does, and it only heals one person. In my opinion, it should heal everybody within, let's say, like a 5-meter radius or an 8-meter radius, right? Kind of give it like that Breath of Life sort of heal, but it heals you for like a big burst, and then it heals everybody else, you know, for like 25% or 50%, whatever, of the ability, because you have the risk that it can be easily dodged. With, of course, if a person is running Sword and Shield and they're running something like the Reflect from defensive stance, or of course in the current state, if they're running Wings, or if they're a Warden using Shimmer, it can be absorbed, reflect, and you don't get anything for your troubles, or it can be dodged, and then you get anything. So there's a high risk. There should be a better reward for what the ability does. Currently, nobody runs it. It's too expensive. 4,000 for, it's like 4K for it. It has a really good heal, but for the risk, it costs too much. I would like to see that changed. I don't think anybody uses Molten Armaments. If you played way back in the day when the game first came out, this ability actually did extra flame damage to you, for you, and for everybody else that you buffed. So even if you were a stand build, it gave everybody a little bit of extra flame damage whenever they performed a light attack or a heavy attack. I think something like that should be brought back to make the ability useful, because nobody uses it. It's not worth using. Because they nerfed heavy attacks, it makes no sense to use this ability, because it increases your heavy attack damage. But they nerfed heavy attack damage, so what's the point? It's like there's no point in running that ability when heavy attacks were not designed anymore to do really good damage. Back in the day it worked that way, but it doesn't work that way now. So it doesn't make sense to keep that ability the way it is. Cinderstorm, they changed it. Maybe people use this in PvE, but for 4,600 Magicka, this is one of the most lackluster heals for a Mag DK. I just want you to see how big this is. This is ridiculous. For a Mag DK to sit in here, I would imagine that they were trying to make this into like a Vigor. It does not. It's like, even with the setup that I run with 3,500 for no CP, with 3,500 spell damage, the healing is atrocious. It's 4,600. Yes, you can move it around. It heals other people. It has a slow connected to it. It should remove the slow. It's far too expensive for what they're trying to do with the ability. Nobody runs it. I never see anybody in PvP run Eruption unless they're like a DK tank running in the Zerg, and maybe they run it. They try to make it better. It just doesn't do what it's supposed to do. Originally, it gave you evasion, the old evasion. Now it just gives you a very mediocre heal or an upfront damage that isn't worth for the cost. Is not worth running. Yes, it has a little slow tie to it. In my opinion, they need to remove all these slows, especially because it's 5 meters. It's ridiculously small. It's ridiculously small when you, especially when you compare it to, for example, in the Alliance buff, Caltrops. Right, for the amount of damage, Caltrops is cheaper. It has a 30% slow. It feels much more than 30%, and the damage is, of course, higher than running this ability. It just doesn't work. It needs a complete rework. Just in talking about the skills alone, not the passive. Magma Shell Corrosive Armor has been broken patch after patch. I tested every single patch. Every single patch, I'm disappointed. It doesn't work. It doesn't work 100% of the time. There's so many times where I find myself, I know I'm about to get swarmed. I pop it, I die instantly. I take normal damage. If they can't fix it, just give it major protection, reduce the cost to a 150 base, increase the damage, call it a day. Take the easy route out, give Magic Decay or Stam Decay, keep the way the damage for Corrosive works, just give it major protection. Just give it major protection and call it a day, because it doesn't work. It hasn't worked. Sometimes it works, most of the time it fails. I tested it on both my Stam Decay and my Magic Decay for the better part of 3 weeks, because especially for this particular build, for my Magic Decay, I wanted to make this really tanky front line. I was sorely disappointed that yet again, Magma Shell doesn't work. It gives your team a nice damage shield, but in terms of it doesn't do anything. Sure, you gain the Battle Roar resources, you gain the heal, you gain a little bit of a damage, and of course you give everybody the shield, but you don't gain the damage reduction. It fails constantly. I've tested it for every patch for weeks on end. I've reported it, it still doesn't work. They don't know how to fix it. They refuse to admit that they don't know how to fix it. Just give it major protection. Call it a day. Reduce the cost, increase the damage output from the flame damage and the poison. Call it a day. Keep it simple, right? Keep it simple, stupid. For other abilities that I like to see change, I'm not sure how Mag Decay will, if you don't run Sword and Shield, will deal with the constant barrage of being a class that's forced into melee with no mobility and no way to now reduce the amount of damage. It's not just the damage reduction that Reflective Wings does for Mag Decay. It's also because of the poor damage output that little bit of extra damage that you get from refracting like a Frags or a Spectral Bow proc or a Snipe really goes a long way. Now you're going to be eating not only the effects, we already take the secondary effects. This is important to understand. You get sniped, you don't get the initial damage, but you still get the minor defile. If a Templar hits you with what's it called, refractive light, you don't get the upfront damage, but you still get the slow. All the secondary effects that are tied to a ranged ability, Reflective Scales does not reflect. You end up taking the secondary effects, and then even the damage is reduced because the damage is based off of you. So if you get hit with the snipe and you were going to take 10k, you don't reflect 10k, because if you're a Magic Decay, the reflected damage is based off of your weapon damage, your weapon critical, and your stamina. The same thing if you're a Stam Decay, reflecting something like Frags, because your max spell damage, your max magic, your max spell critical is low. the damage that you're reflecting is also low. So it's not, sure, it's strong against characters like Magblade, only if you particularly run Destro Resto build and you refuse to run Crushing Shock. If you refuse to run Crushing Shock because you want to run Swallow Soul, then you're the one that's making that decision to not use abilities that counter Reflective Plate, like for example, Crushing Shock. And of course, you could also run Concealed Weapon. You have an ult that bypasses Reflective Plate. There's a lot of options, but to nerf DK Wings, you're really going to hurt, especially Mag DK, because at least Stam DK can roll dodge. Mag DK, you really only have one CC break and maybe a roll dodge after that to help mitigate that damage. What's going to happen is Mag DK is going to be forced back into Sworded Shield, perma-block builds, and then people are going to complain about Mag DK perma-block. And it's going to ruin the diversity of being able to use Destro or Dual Wield for Mag DK, as well, and pigeonhole Mag DK back into Sword and Shield, because they're not going to be able to reflect damage from ranged projectiles, and they're going to be forced back into just blocking all damage. In my opinion, there are a lot of bad changes coming with the next patch that are going to affect Mag DK. I would love to see them buff Shifting Standard. I can't tell you how many times I get into team fights and I drop a standard and people are just sitting there taking next to no damage. I wish that it could follow, because like for example Permafrost, and just throw that banner on my back and I can move around with it, because the cast time, like it's like 1.5 seconds between you recasting and it dropping and then doing damage again, and it's so small that people just walk right out of it. So I'm not quite sure what changes they're going to make. I feel like they're going in the wrong direction. A lot of Mag DK passives desperately need an update, and a lot of their skills need cost reduction to make them more viable in the present environment. Mag DK is literally stuck back the same passives from when the game released. Every other class, in my opinion, if you're good on a Mag DK, you will be better on any other class. Like if you play really well on Mag DK and you switch over to Magplar, you're like God mode, because it's ridiculous the amount of utility that you get, and the cohesive, the way the passives work, the cost reduction that you get, the execute, the burst heals, the cleanse. It's like there's so much that in the kit for what is a stand your ground build that Mag DK just lacks. And I wish that there would be a combat developer that understood that would make the necessary changes to make Mag DK more viable in PvP. This is MGTOW Gamer, and I'm out. Feel free to check me out on Twitch. I stream pretty regularly. I play all classes, all builds, hybrid, stamina, magicka. I play all classes. Feel free to stop by if you like the stream. Feel free to give me a like. I appreciate it. Have a good day, and God bless.